It was just after midnight when a group of black SUVs arrived at the military hospital, and at first, the staff barely noticed, thinking it was just another government visit. But when President Donald Trump stepped out with Secret Service agents around him, quiet whispers quickly spread. Unlike his usual visits, there were no cameras, no press, and no staged moments, just a quiet, unannounced arrival that left the nurses exchanging surprised looks, wondering why he had come so late at night. Trump, adjusting his suit, walked inside with a serious look, and when the hospital's head doctor, Dr. Reynolds, approached, unsure what to say, Trump simply raised his hand and said, "I'm not here for politics. Take me to the soldiers." The hospital halls were quiet, except for the beeping of machines and nurses going about their duties. Inside were brave men and women who had sacrificed everything, some scarred, some missing limbs, many quietly battling their pain. Trump walked past the beds, looking at each face, and a young nurse named Emily watched carefully. She had seen politicians visit before, always with cameras and promises. But Trump looked like he was really searching for someone, not just putting on a show. Then he stopped at one bed, where a young man stared at the ceiling. His name tag said Private James Carter, a double amputee who had lost both legs in combat and, with them, his hope. His fiancée had left. Friends had disappeared, and he felt forgotten. When he noticed Trump beside him, James muttered, "You don't have to pretend you care," but instead of walking away, Trump pulled up a chair and said, "Tell me your story." James hesitated, but something about Trump's voice made him speak, and for the first time in months, he opened up about his pain, his fear, and how alone he felt. He talked about the explosion that changed his life, the pain that never left, the nightmares, and the feeling that no one cared anymore. Trump listened quietly, never interrupting, and finally asked, "Do you feel like your service meant nothing?" James clenched his jaw and said, "Sometimes, yeah." Trump sighed, looking genuinely moved, and said, "That's a damn shame, because you're a hero, and this country should never forget that." And for the first time in a long time, James felt truly seen, as Trump gently patted his shoulder and made him a promise. "You're not alone, I won't let you be," Trump told James, and James wasn't sure if he believed it at first, but later, young nurse Emily, who had seen James at his lowest, refusing visitors and giving up on life, watched their conversation from afar with a heavy heart and decided to step in. Approaching carefully, she said, "Mr. President, there are others like James, soldiers with no family, no one to remind them they matter." And Trump, with a serious but kind look, said, "Then show me." Without a second thought, Emily led him deeper into the ward, past rooms filled with wounded soldiers, some too weak to even speak, and eventually they stopped at room 207. "He hasn't spoken to anyone in weeks," she whispered, explaining that the man inside had lost more than just his health. Trump nodded and walked in. The room was quiet, dimly lit, with a small window showing the night sky, and sitting by that window was an older veteran, Sergeant William Reynolds, staring outside like he was waiting for something that would never come. When Trump entered, William barely looked at him and said, "Another visitor come to pity me," but Trump sat down calmly and replied, "No pity, just respect." William turned, skeptical, and asked, "Respect for what? For being too broken to serve?" Trump shook his head and said, "For giving everything you had. For raising a son who followed in your footsteps." At that, William froze. His son, Lieutenant Jason Reynolds, had died in combat, a hero whose story had faded from the news. "How do you know?" William whispered, his hands trembling as he spoke of Jason, who had saved his whole unit and sacrificed his life. "They called him a hero for a day," William said bitterly, "then they forgot." Trump leaned forward and said, "I won't forget." William scoffed, but there was something different in Trump's voice, steady, certain, as he promised, "His name will be honored. I'll make sure of it." For the first time in years, William's hardened face softened, tears glistening in his eyes, finally feeling like his son's sacrifice hadn't been lost to time. Then Trump turned to the hospital staff and said, "I need a list, every fallen soldier whose family is struggling, every veteran who's been forgotten." The staff paused, not used to hearing this kind of request from a president, but one doctor, clearly moved, said, "We can do that, Mr. President." Trump nodded and got to work. He didn't just shake hands and leave. He sat with doctors, listened to nurses, wrote down names himself, made phone calls, arranged meetings, and started something real. For once, these soldiers weren't just names in a file. They were people, stories worth remembering. As Trump walked out of the ward, he noticed a small boy sitting on a bench, holding a worn teddy bear, his tired eyes meeting Trump's with a look that mixed sadness and curiosity, like even he sensed something important had just happened. Trump stopped and knelt down to the little boy's level and asked, "What's your name, champ?" The boy hesitated before quietly saying, "Michael." His mother, standing nearby with teary eyes, stepped forward and explained, "His father, Captain Rodriguez, is in critical condition. We don't know if he'll make it." Trump looked at the closed ICU door and gently placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, saying, "Your dad's a fighter, and fighters don't give up." Michael held his teddy bear tighter, wanting to believe him but still scared to hope. Trump then entered the dim ICU room where Captain Rodriguez lay still, connected to machines beeping steadily. The man looked weak and barely hanging on. Trump sat beside him, leaned in, and spoke softly, "Your son is waiting for you. You've given everything for this country. Now it's our turn to give something back." The only sound was the steady beep of the heart monitor, but then, as if hearing the words, Captain Rodriguez's eyelids moved, and a tear rolled down his cheek. A nurse gasped. It was the first sign of movement in days. Trump gently patted his hand and whispered, "Hang in there." Later that night, as Rodriguez's condition began to improve, Trump handed Michael's mom a sealed envelope and said, "Open this when you're ready." She clutched it, confused, and watched him walk away. Hours later, when she opened the letter, her breath caught. It wasn't an official form, but a handwritten note from Trump thanking her husband for his service, encouraging Michael to dream big, and including a promise: a full scholarship for Michael and financial support for struggling military families. Tears streamed down her face. It wasn't just a letter, it was hope. Back at the White House, Trump didn't go to bed. Instead, he made calls to lawmakers, advisors, and military leaders, pushing for better health care, mental health resources, and full scholarships for the children of fallen soldiers. The next morning, his team was shocked by his urgency as he held up documents and said, "We need action. These men and women gave everything, now it's our turn." Quietly, the news of his hospital visit spread through the military community, even though there was no press coverage. Soldiers who had felt forgotten began receiving surprise calls from support groups, and struggling veterans started getting real help. Trump didn't turn it into a publicity stunt. When asked about the changes, he just said, "It's the right thing to do." Emily, the nurse, watched everything unfold in disbelief. She had expected a quick visit, just another politician passing through, but now she saw real change happening and realized he actually meant every word. She quietly whispered to a coworker, and for the first time in a long while, a sense of hope filled the hospital halls. Late that night, Trump sat alone in the Oval Office, staring at a photo he had received during his visit, Sergeant William Reynolds' son, Jason, in uniform. He gently traced the edges of the picture, deep in thought. Jason had been a hero, yet few even knew his name. Trump opened his desk drawer where he had kept a small stack of names, soldiers he had heard about during the visit, and softly said, "I won't forget you." Despite all the political fights he faced every day, this moment reminded him what truly mattered, and he silently promised to carry their stories with him. Months later, Emily, the nurse, wrote a letter she never imagined sending. She had seen with her own eyes how one night had changed everything. Soldiers who once felt invisible now had hope, support, and real resources, all because a president had visited, not for attention or votes, but simply because he cared. She sealed the envelope and mailed it to the White House, expecting nothing back. But then, one morning, an official-looking envelope arrived with the White House seal. With shaking hands, she opened it and found a handwritten note from Trump himself that read, "Emily, the real heroes are people like you, the ones who never stop fighting for these soldiers. Thank you for what you do. You inspire more than you know." Inside was something even more powerful, a signed bill to improve military hospital conditions across the country. She held the letter to her chest, overwhelmed, knowing this wasn't just talk, it was real change. Though the world might never know the full story of that night, she did, and that was enough. Months later, a private gathering was held at the White House for veterans from across the nation. There were no cameras or political speeches, just a heartfelt event. Sergeant William Reynolds attended, and, as he shook Trump's hand, he said softly, "You kept your promise." Trump nodded. James Carter, the young soldier who had once lost all hope, was there too, now leading a support group for wounded veterans. "I'm alive because of that night," he said. Trump simply patted his shoulder. That moment had changed James. He went on to start a small support circle that eventually grew into a national movement helping thousands. News outlets later picked up the story, but James always credited that one moment. "He made me believe I wasn't worthless," he told reporters. "That's why I'm still here." His comeback inspired many others, showing how even one act of kindness could change everything. A year later, Trump returned to that same military hospital, no longer a stranger but a familiar face. Soldiers who once felt hopeless now smiled and sat up proudly. James, in his wheelchair, talked with new patients, passing on the same hope he had once received. Emily welcomed Trump at the door, her eyes filled with emotion. "You didn't just visit," she said. "You changed lives." Trump smiled and replied, "They changed mine too." As he walked through the halls, he stopped by Captain Rodriguez's room. Now recovered, Rodriguez stood and saluted. "I made it," he said. Trump gripped his hand and answered, "I never doubted you." As Trump prepared to leave, Sergeant Reynolds slowly stood with his cane, raised his hand, and saluted. One by one, other soldiers followed, those in beds and wheelchairs, each offering their own salute. Doctors, nurses, and staff stood silently in respect. That moment wasn't about politics or power, it was about something far more important: honor, gratitude, and remembering sacrifices that should never be forgotten. As Trump walked out, Emily wiped a tear from her eye, and in the quiet hum of the hospital, one thing was certain: no one would ever forget that night.